The letter trembled in her hands as the train slowed to a groaning halt, steam hissing like a warning she had ignored for too long. And Clara, Whitmore pressed the thin paper to her chest as if it might steady her heart, though nothing could truly prepare her for what waited beyond the wooden platform, because mail-order brides were chosen like tools or livestock. And she knew that better than anyone, having crossed 3 states with a single suitcase, a borrowed dress, and a promise written by a man she had never met. A man named Caleb Stone, who had described himself in careful, restrained words: widower, rancher, father, never once mentioning whether he wanted a wife out of duty or desire, never once promising kindness. And as the train doors opened and sunlight spilled across the platform, Clara stepped down into the dust, her boots sinking slightly, her breath catching when she saw him at once, because he stood apart from the others, tall and solid, wearing a weathered hat and a vest faded by sun and years, holding a small boy on his hip. And the child, no older than 3, reached toward her the instant their eyes met, fingers opening and closing as if he already knew her, and the sight struck Clara so deeply she nearly forgot to breathe, because no one had ever reached for her like that before, not without fear or expectation. And the men behind Caleb watched with open curiosity, some with folded arms, others whispering, while Clara forced herself forward, every step an act of courage, until she stood before him, close enough to see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the guardedness in his expression. And she spoke her name softly, offering her hand the way a lady should, though her voice shook and Caleb nodded, his grip brief and firm, his gaze flicking between her and the child, whose small palm brushed Clara's sleeve as if testing whether she was real. And it was then, in that fragile, suspended moment, that Clara understood the truth she had tried to ignore on the journey west. She could still be sent back, still be rejected, still be told she wasn't what he wanted, and the thought burned so fiercely she blurted the words, before she could stop herself, telling him, "If I'm not what you expected, you can send me back," her eyes dropping to the ground in practiced humility, the kind learned by women who survived by being small, and the platform seemed to go quiet, even the men behind them pausing, because everyone knew the unspoken rules, knew how easily a woman like her could be dismissed, and Clara braced herself for it, for the polite refusal, the explanation, the pity, but instead she heard the child laugh, a clear bell-like sound, and felt his hand clutch her finger with sudden certainty, and Caleb looked down at his son, something shifting in his eyes, something raw and unguarded, and when he spoke, his voice was low but steady, carrying farther than he intended, and he said, "My son already chose you," and the word struck Clara harder than any rejection ever could, because they weren't romantic or rehearsed, they were simply true, and the child leaned fully toward her then, arms lifting, asking without words to be held, and Clara hesitated only a second before taking him, feeling the warmth of his small body against her, the weight of him settling into her arms as if he belonged there, as if she belonged there, and the men behind them exchanged glances, some surprised, some softened, because even in a hard town, a child's choice carried a kind of sacred authority, and Caleb cleared his throat, gesturing toward the waiting wagon, telling her the ride would be long, the ranch farther than it looked, and Clara nodded, still stunned, her heart pounding not with fear now but with something dangerously close to hope, though she warned herself not to trust it, because hope had a way of breaking women like her. And as they rode through the open land, dust trailing behind them, Caleb spoke little, but he watched her with quiet attention, noting how naturally she adjusted the child on her hip, how she hummed when he grew restless, how she listened more than she spoke, and Clara, for her part, studied the world she had entered, the endless sky, the creak of leather, the loneliness of the plains, and wondered what kind of woman it would take to truly belong here, wondering if she could become her. And when they reached the ranch at dusk, the house standing solitary against the horizon, Clara felt the full weight of her choice pressed down on her, because this was no longer a letter or a promise. It was a life unfolding in real time, and inside the house she would learn the rules, the expectations, the silences. But as Caleb took his son back into his arms and carried him inside, the child twisting to wave at her as if afraid she might disappear, Clara made a quiet vow to herself that night, standing alone in the doorway with her suitcase at her feet, that she would not be sent back again, not by him, not by fear, not by the past she had fled. And if you're listening to this story right now, drawn in by a moment of unexpected kindness and a child's simple truth, This is where the journey truly begins. So stay with it, subscribe to the channel, because what follows will test every promise made on that dusty platform, and the choice a child made that day will change all of their lives, forever. Morning came to the ranch with a quiet that felt heavier than noise, and Clara woke before the sun, lying stiff beneath unfamiliar blankets, listening to the slow creak of the house as if it were breathing around her, reminding her with every sound that she was a guest here, not yet a wife, not yet anything clearly defined, and she rose carefully, smoothing her borrowed dress, determined not to be a burden, because women like her survived by usefulness, by anticipation, by staying one step ahead of rejection, and she found the kitchen cold and sparse, the scent of coffee lingering faintly as proof Caleb had already been awake, likely tending the animals, and without asking permission she began to work, cleaning, setting bread to warm, drawing water, movements practiced from years of serving in other people's homes. But something felt different now, because when the small boy, Eli, she had learned his name the night before, patted, in rubbing his eyes and smiled when he saw her, it wasn't the smile of a child greeting a servant. It was the smile of recognition, of safety, and he climbed onto a chair and watched her as if this were the most natural thing in the world. And when Caleb finally entered, dust on his boots and tension in his shoulders, he paused at the sight of them together. The table set, the child chattering softly to Clara about a horse he wanted to ride one day, and something unreadable passed over Caleb's face. Not displeasure, but caution, as though he were witnessing a fragile thing that might shatter if he breathed too hard. And breakfast passed with careful politeness, Clara answering questions honestly but briefly, refusing to embellish her past, while Caleb spoke of the ranch, of the seasons of work that never truly ended, and it became clear to her then that he wasn't cruel, only guarded, a man who had lost once and built walls from responsibility rather than grief. And after breakfast he told her plainly that the town would talk, that people would judge her, that some would assume things about a woman who arrived by train with no family, and Clara nodded because she had expected that. But what she hadn't expected was his next words, spoken stiffly, almost awkwardly, telling her she owed him nothing beyond honesty, that if she wished to leave after seeing the ranch, he would arrange it, and the offer meant as decency, cut deeper than refusal, because it reminded her how temporary her place still was, how easily she could vanish from this life. And yet Eli tugged at her skirt just then, asking if she would come see the horses, and without waiting for permission she agreed, stepping into the sunlight with him, feeling the land stretch endlessly around them. And as she walked beside the child, answering his endless questions, she realized how much he watched her face, as if memorizing it, as if afraid she might disappear like his mother had, a truth she learned slowly through fragments, through the way the house held 2 cups where 3 once stood, through the way Caleb stiffened when Eli asked questions about Mama, and by midday, Clara understood that loving this child would mean standing in the shadow of a woman who had died young and left behind more absence than memory, and that knowledge frightened her more than loneliness ever had, because grief was not something you could outwork. And that afternoon, when a woman from town arrived unannounced with a basket and thinly veiled curiosity, Clara felt the judgment settle on her shoulders, felt the questions behind the smile, the assumptions behind the welcome, and she answered with grace, refusing to shrink, refusing to defend herself, while Caleb watched silently from the doorway, noting how Clara neither flinched nor hardened. And when the woman left, her opinion unclear, Caleb finally spoke, admitting the town could be unkind, that his choice to seek a bride by letter had already stirred talk, and Clara surprised him by saying softly that she understood being discussed like a problem to be solved. And that night, as wind rattled the windows and Eli slept curled against Clara's side after a bad dream, calling her name without hesitation, Caleb stood in the doorway longer than necessary, watching them, torn between gratitude and fear, because the more naturally Clara fit into the empty spaces of his life, the more terrified he became of what would happen if she left. And yet he did nothing to stop the bond from growing, did nothing to push her away, and days passed like that, fragile and hopeful, Clara learning the rhythms of the ranch, earning quiet respect from the hands, soothing Eli's fears, laughing in ways she hadn't in years, while Caleb found himself listening for her footsteps, watching her reactions, feeling the slow, dangerous thaw of his own guarded heart until one evening, after a hard day and a careless comment from a ranch hand about renting affection. Clara overheard and fled to the edge of the property, humiliation burning hot and familiar, and when Caleb found her there, eyes bright with unshed tears, she finally spoke the truth she had been carrying since the platform, telling him she knew she was easy to discard, that she knew people believed she was desperate, replaceable, and that she never wanted to trap him or his son into needing her, and the rawness of her confession stripped away any remaining distance between them, because Caleb answered not with reassurance but with honesty of his own, admitting he was afraid to need someone again, afraid to let Eli love someone who might leave, afraid to hope, and in that shared fear, something finally shifted. Not yet love, but trust, fragile and growing. And if you're listening right now, feeling that slow pull of two wounded people learning how to stand in the same light, don't walk away yet. Subscribe to the channel and stay with this story, because the choice a child made is about to be tested by the world beyond the ranch, and what comes next will demand more courage than either of them knows they have. The test came not with thunder or gunfire, but with a letter, thin and official, delivered one quiet morning when the sky was too blue to warn anyone, and Clara recognized the seal before Caleb even opened it. Because the past has a way of finding women like her, no matter how far they run. And as he read, his jaw tightened, Eli playing at their feet unaware, and when Caleb finally spoke, telling her that an inquiry had been made, that someone had questioned the legality of her arrangement, the respectability of her presence in town, Clara felt the old panic rise like a tide, because she understood what such questions meant in places like this, where kindness was conditional and belonging had rules, and she did not wait for accusation or reassurance, but instead did what she had always done when the world narrowed. She prepared to leave, packing her small case with careful hands, heart aching not for herself, but for the child who would wake to find her gone. And when Caleb found her in the bedroom, folding the blue dress he had come to associate with calm, she spoke first, telling him she would not bring trouble to his door, that she would not let Eli be hurt by whispers or officials who wanted a simple answer to a complicated kindness, and the words came out steady because she had practiced them her whole life. But Caleb surprised her by stepping closer, not angry, not distant, but resolved, and he said quietly that running would only prove the town right, that Eli had already lost one woman who vanished without explanation, and he would not let another disappearance carve the same wound deeper, and the firmness in his voice shook Clara more than any raised tone could have, because it implied a choice, and she realized then that for the first time, someone was asking her to stay, not out of obligation but belief. And when Eli toddled in clutching a wooden horse, pressing it into her palm as if sealing a promise, Clara's resolve cracked, tears finally spilling because love, she learned in that moment, was not gentle, it was terrifying, demanding courage she wasn't sure she possessed. And the days that followed were harder than any she had known, as the town's scrutiny sharpened, glances lingering, conversation stopping. When she entered and an official visit loomed like a storm cloud, yet Caleb stood beside her through it all, answering questions with calm authority, stating plainly that Clara was under his roof by choice, that she was treated with respect, that his intentions were honorable. And when the official suggested Eli might be confused by the arrangement, Caleb did not hesitate, calling his son forward and asking him whom he wanted beside him. And Eli's answer, simple and unwavering, broke something open in every room it echoed through, because children do not lie about safety, and the town, confronted with that truth, began slowly, grudgingly, to soften, not all at once, not without lingering judgment, but enough to allow Clara to breathe again. And in the quiet after the storm, something new grew between her and Caleb, no longer fragile but rooted, built from shared battles and small domestic victories, from laughter over burnt bread and evenings on the porch watching Eli chase fireflies. And one night, long after the house had settled and the world seemed mercifully still, Caleb spoke the words Clara had never dared to hope for, telling her that she was no longer a guest, no longer temporary, that whatever name the world gave her place, in his heart and his home she was chosen, not because of a letter or an arrangement, but because she had shown up every day with patience and courage. And Clara answered him honestly, admitting that she had asked once to be sent back because she believed love was something granted by permission, not earned by presence, and he took her hand then, grounding her in the truth she was still learning, that some families were formed not by blood or law but by the quiet, persistent choice to stay, and the wedding, when it came, was small and imperfect, attended by a town still learning how to accept what it could not control. But when Clara walked toward Caleb, Eli scattering petals ahead of her with solemn pride, she felt no fear, only a deep, steady certainty. Because she was no longer a woman waiting to be chosen, she was already home. And if this story has stayed with you, if you've felt the pull of a child's trust in two guarded hearts, learning to stand together, then don't let the journey end here. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because stories like this remind us that, sometimes the bravest, love begins with a single sentence, spoken at the right moment, and the courage to believe it.